The obsidian rotunda of the High Synod did not echo. It devoured sound. It was a cavernous, spherical chamber suspended in the gravitational null point of the Ethelgard homeworld, a structure built from the fused hulls of conquered starships from 1,000 forgotten wars, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the anxieties of the galaxy's most powerful elders. High Counselor Valen, a being of slender limbs and bioluminescent skin that shimmered with the pale violet of waning twilight, stood at the precipice of the central dais. His multifaceted eyes, usually calm and devoid of passion, were currently twitching with a rhythm that betrayed deep, systemic agitation. Below him, in the tiered shadows of the amphitheater, the representatives of the galactic core civilizations were a sea of shifting shapes, chitinous armor, flowing gaseous robes, and cybernetic interfaces. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and the pheromones of fear. They were not here to discuss trade routes or stellar mapping. They were here to discuss the infestation. They were here to discuss the Terrans. The silence that hung over the assembly was not the silence of peace, but the indrawn breath before a scream. Valen placed his hands upon the sensory rail, feeling the cold data streams pulsing beneath his fingertips, feeding him the grim reality of the border sectors. He did not need the data to know the truth. He could feel it in the psychic tremors of his own people. Humanity was not merely expanding. It was consuming the void with an appetite that defied the laws of celestial mechanics and the decorum of the ancient races. The motion is absolute. Valen's voice projected directly into the auditory centers of every delegate, a telepathic broadcast that carried the weight of 10,000 years of rule. The Terran Union has violated the Treaty of Solitude not by act of war, but by act of existence. They settle worlds deemed uninhabitable. They terraform dead rocks into gardens within mere cycles. They replicate their fleets with a speed that suggests they do not build ships, but rather grow them. They are a cancer upon the order of the core. We offered them boundaries, and they thanked us while stepping over them. We offered them trade, and they reverse-engineered our engines to surpass us. Today, we do not vote on sanctions. We vote on survival. A ripple of assent moved through the chamber, a murmuring of varied vocal chords and synthesized tones. To Valen's left sat War Master Krex of the Saurian Ascendancy, a massive creature of scales and scars, his breathing apparatus hissing with wet, metallic rhythm. Krex did not look at Valen. He stared at the holographic projection floating in the center of the room, a map of the galaxy. On that map, the blue smear of human influence was bleeding into the pristine gold of the core systems. It was an ink spill on a masterpiece painting. They possess no grace, Krex rumbled, his voice like grinding stones. They possess no honor. I sent a patrol to the Vale Nebula to enforce the border. The humans did not fire, they simply pushed. Their ships are heavy, ugly things, devoid of aesthetics, built only for durability and thrust. My captains reported that the human vessels absorbed plasma fire as if it were rain, and then hailed them to ask if they required assistance with their targeting calibration. It is an insult deeper than violence. They pity us, Valen, the young pity the old. That is why they must be outlawed, not because they are weak, but because they do not fear us. And a galaxy without fear is a galaxy without order. The logic was brutal, archaic, and undeniably effective. The High Synod had ruled for eons by maintaining a delicate balance of power, a hierarchy where the ancient races sat at the top, and the younger races learned their place through long epochs of servitude and gradual uplift. Humanity had skipped the line. They had burst onto the galactic stage from their death-world cradle with the energy of a supernova, bypassing the rites of passage, ignoring the diplomatic protocols, and simply solving problems that the Synod had declared unsolvable. Where the Ethelgard saw a hyperstorm, humans saw an energy source. Where the Saurians saw a death world, humans saw a mining colony. It was unnatural. It was terrifying. Valen raised a hand, and the hologram shifted, turning a violent, pulsating crimson. The Edict of Containment is drafted. It declares the human species a Class 1 hazard. It strips them of all navigational rights within the core. It authorizes the seizure of their assets and the blockade of their sol system. It is a declaration of total isolation. If they leave their atmosphere, they will be fired upon. If they transmit a signal, it will be jammed. We will seal them in the dark until they learn to kneel. The gravity of the statement pressed down on the assembly. To outlaw a species was a measure not taken since the suppression of the void mines 3,000 cycles ago. It was an act of galactic excommunication, but the fear was stronger than the hesitation. The delegates began to cast their votes, lights flickering on the podiums, green for agreement, green for safety, green for the end of the human nuisance. Valen watched the tally rise, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. They would teach these upstarts the meaning of antiquity. They would show them that speed and ingenuity were no match for the accumulated weight of history. The vote passed with a 90% majority. The edict was law. Humanity was illegal. But the moment the final vote was locked into the crystalline matrix of the Synod's computer, the chamber's lighting faltered. It was a subtle thing at first, a dimming of the bioluminescent moss that lined the walls, followed by a low, vibrating thrum that seemed to emanate from the floor itself. Valen frowned, tapping the sensory rail. "Status," he commanded, his thought voice sharp. "Why is there a power fluctuation?" The artificial intelligence that governed the station did not respond immediately. When it did, the voice was stripped of its usual soothing cadence, replaced by a jagged, urgent tone. "High Counselor, deep space sensors are detecting a mass displacement event." Valen scoffed, the arrogance returning. "A solar flare, a gravity shear, filter it out." "Negative, Counselor," the AI responded, and for the first time in his long life, Valen heard something akin to panic in the machine's algorithm. "It is not natural phenomena. It is subspace rupture, multiple vectors. The origin points are everywhere." The holographic map in the center of the room twisted. The blue smear of human territory did not shrink. It exploded. Thousands of new contact points appeared instantly, not just in the human sectors, but along the entire perimeter of the core systems. They appeared in the shipping lanes. They appeared in the drift space between stars. They appeared in the high-gravity wells of black holes where no ship should survive. The red warning lights of the chamber bathed the terrified faces of the delegates in the color of blood. "They are breaching," Krex roared, standing up, his claws digging into the stone of his podium. "The humans. They are invading, they knew. Somehow they knew." Valen stared at the map, his mind reeling. The sheer scale of the signatures was impossible. No civilization could mobilize a fleet of this magnitude in secret. It would require the resources of 100 star systems, the coordination of a hive mind, the logistical genius of a god. And yet there they were. The sensor readings described vessels of colossal tonnage, ships so large they generated their own gravitational tides. "The Armadas," Valen whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. They were not reacting to the vote. They were already assembling. They were waiting. The timing was too precise. The humans hadn't mobilized because of the edict. The edict had merely coincided with a plan that had been in motion for cycles. The council had thought they were judging a prisoner, only to find they were standing in the path of a stampede. "Shields," screamed a delegate from the aquatic technocracy, her containment suit bubbling with agitation. "Raise the planetary shields, call the fleets." But it was too late for fleets. The sensors showed the human vessels emerging from slipspace with a precision that mocked the Synod's understanding of physics. They didn't decelerate. They simply arrived, their inertia negated by technology the Council could not comprehend. The view screens around the rotunda, huge panes of diamond glass looking out into the void, suddenly went dark as the stars were blotted out. Not by clouds, but by metal. A silence deeper than the one before descended upon the chamber. Through the view screens, the delegates saw them. They were not the sleek, artistic vessels of the Ethelgard, nor the jagged, predatory warships of the Saurians. The human ships were monoliths. Great slabs of matte gray alloy scarred by cosmic dust, bristling with antenna arrays and weapon ports that remained closed. They hung in the void like manufactured moons, silent, imposing, and terrifyingly still. They did not hail the station. They did not charge weapons. They simply existed, a wall of steel encompassing the Council's world. "They have surrounded us," Krex said, his voice dropping to a low growl stripped of its bravado. "That is not an invasion force, Valen, that is a cage." The irony was bitter on Valen's tongue. They had just voted to contain humanity, and in response, humanity had enclosed the Synod in a sphere of iron. The communications grid lit up not with demands for surrender, but with a single, looping signal. It was a request for docking clearance. One shuttle. Standard diplomatic codes. The audacity was paralyzing. A fleet capable of cracking the planet into dust was waiting in orbit, and they were asking permission to land a shuttle. "Grant it," Valen said, his voice trembling. "Grant it immediately." He sank back into his seat, feeling the weight of his age. The edict was meaningless now. You do not outlaw the storm, you only pray it passes. The wait for the shuttle was an agony of suspense. The delegates watched the small craft detach from the belly of a Leviathan super-dreadnought, a speck of white against the darkness of the void. It descended through the atmosphere, its heat shielding glowing bright orange, a falling star carrying the judgment of the young race. When it docked, the tremors of the locking clamps reverberated through the council floor. Valen composed himself. He was the High Counselor of the Ethelgard, the oldest living sentient in the sector. He would not show fear to a species that was still banging rocks together when his ancestors were weaving starlight. He stood tall, smoothing his robes, and signaled for the great doors to be unsealed. The hiss of decompression equalization was deafening in the quiet room. The figure that entered was not a warrior in power armor, nor a cyborg merged with machine. It was a woman. She was small compared to the Saurians, frail compared to the Ethelgard. She wore a simple suit of gray fabric unadorned by medals or rank insignia. Her hair was silver, tied back in a severe bun, and her face was lined with the maps of time and stress. She walked with a cane, a simple stick of polished wood, the tapping sound echoing rhythmically against the floor. Tap, step, tap, step. She walked to the center of the dais, the eyes of 1,000 alien warlords and diplomats fixed upon her. She did not look up at the tiers. She looked straight at Valen. She looked at him with eyes that were dark, tired, and profoundly sad. There was no triumph in her gaze, no arrogance of the conqueror. "I am Ambassador Alara Vance," she said, her voice amplified by a small device on her collar. It was a calm voice, the voice of a teacher addressing an unruly classroom. "And I am here to accept your edict." The confusion in the room was palpable. Valen blinked, his mandibles clicking. "You accept it?" he asked, his translation matrix struggling to interpret the tone. "You have surrounded our homeworld with enough firepower to extinguish a star, and you claim to accept your banishment." Alara Vance sighed, leaning heavily on her cane. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a physical data slate, an archaic, clunky device, and placed it on the podium. "The Edict of Containment," she said, tapping the slate. "You wish for humanity to withdraw to its own borders. You wish for us to cease exploration of the core. You wish for us to be silent." She looked around the room, meeting the gazes of the terrifying Saurians and the cold technocrats. "We agree. In fact, we insist upon it. We did not assemble the Grand Fleet to threaten you, Counselor. We assembled it to say goodbye." Krex slammed his fist onto his console. "Lies, do not mock us, human. You do not mobilize a fleet of this magnitude for a farewell. You are posturing. You seek to intimidate the Council into granting you more territory." Alara turned to the Saurian War Master, her expression unreadable. "Intimidate you?" she asked softly. "War Master, if we wanted this sector, we would have taken it 60 years ago when we introduced the quantum tap drive. We do not want your worlds. They are fragile. They are soft. We built our fleets because we have work to do, work that you, in your infinite wisdom and ancient laws, have refused to acknowledge." She gestured to the view screens, to the wall of ships blocking the stars. "You see weapons, we see tools. You see an invasion, we see a levy." Valen stepped down from his high seat, floating on a grav disk to hover at eye level with the human woman. "Explain," he commanded. "If this is not an act of war against the Council, then for whom are the Armadas intended? There is no other power in the galaxy capable of challenging you." Alara's face hardened. The sadness evaporated, replaced by a cold, steel resolve that sent a shiver through Valen's sophisticated nervous system. "There is no other power in the galaxy," she corrected him. "But the galaxy is a house, Counselor, and houses have doors, and sometimes things knock." She pressed a button on her data slate. The central hologram of the Council chamber changed. The map of the galaxy zoomed out, pulling away from the core, away from the spiral arms, until the entire Milky Way was a spinning disk of light in the center of the darkness. Then red markers began to appear, not inside the galaxy but outside it, in the intergalactic void. They were faint at first, mere static, but as the resolution sharpened, the counselors gasped. They were not ships, they were shadows. Massive, amorphous distortions of space-time, moving toward the galactic rim. They were moving against the spin of the galaxy, moving with a hunger that the sensors translated as a terrifying entropy. "We call them the Hush," Alara said quietly. "We found the first traces of them 50 years ago when we colonized the outer rim. We tried to warn you. We sent diplomatic envoys with data packets. We sent scientists to your universities. You turned them away. You called our data glitches and our warnings primitive superstition. You were too busy debating trade tariffs and border disputes to look out the window." Valen stared at the red shadows. The scale was impossible. Each shadow was the size of a star cluster. This is a simulation," he stammered, his denial rising like bile. "It must be. If something this large were approaching, the ancient arrays would have detected it." "The ancient arrays are calibrated to look for fusion signatures and Mass Effect drives," Alara countered. "The Hush do not use technology as you understand it. They consume energy. They eat the noise of civilization. That is why they are coming. You are loud, Counselor." The core systems are a beacon of radio waves, subspace chatter, and psychic energy. You are ringing a dinner bell in a dark forest. She took a step closer to Valen. We realized you wouldn't listen. Your council is too old, too set in its ways. You believe that because you have ruled for 1,000,000 years, you will rule for 1,000,000 more. But entropy does not care about your tenure, so we made a choice. We couldn't save you by arguing with you. We could only save you by stepping between you and the dark. The silence in the chamber was different now. It was the silence of a man who realizes he has been sleeping on a bomb. The Armadas, Valen whispered. They are not for us. They are the shield, Alara said. Every ship you see up there, millions of tons of alloy, railguns the size of skyscrapers, reactors that burn with the power of captive suns, they are all heading to the galactic rim. We are emptying our worlds, Counselor. We are stripping our colonies. We are taking every able-bodied human, every drone, every scrap of metal we can find. We are going to the edge of the dark, and we are going to hold the line. She looked back at the holographic map. The edict of containment you just passed, it effectively seals the core off from the rim. It creates a buffer zone. We were going to ask you to do it, but you saved us the trouble. By outlawing us, by cutting ties, you have made it easier for us to operate without your bureaucracy slowing us down. You have given us the freedom to die for you. Krex sank into his chair, his warrior spirit crushed by the revelation. You go to fight a war you cannot win, he rumbled. Those shadows, they are larger than galaxies. You are insects fighting a storm. Perhaps, Alara said, a faint, grim smile touching her lips. But humans have a history of fighting storms. We are stubborn, and we are very, very good at being impossible. She tapped her cane on the floor again. But we are not leaving you defenseless. We are leaving you the archives, all our technology, all our medical advancements. Everything you feared us for, we are leaving behind. Use it, build your own fleets, strengthen your own shields. If we fail, you will have perhaps another century before the hush reach you. If we succeed, well, you won't hear from us again. Valen felt a sensation he had never experienced in his long life, shame. It burned hot and acidic in his chest. He looked at the frail human woman, this representative of a species they had deemed wild and uncivilized, and he saw a nobility that eclipsed the history of the Ethelgard. They were sacrificing themselves. They were walking into the meat grinder of the cosmos to protect a galaxy that had just voted to spit on them. Why, Valen asked, his voice cracking. Why do this for us? We have treated you with nothing but suspicion and disdain. Alara looked up at the high vaulted ceiling of the chamber, as if looking through the hull of the station to the stars beyond. Because when we looked at the stars from our mud ball of a home, we felt alone. We spent thousands of years dreaming of meeting others. When we finally found you, you were arrogant, bureaucratic, and flawed. But you were alive. You were someone to talk to. And we realized something, Counselor. We don't want to be alone in the dark again. We would rather die protecting a flawed family than live as the only survivors in a silent graveyard. She turned and began to walk back toward the shuttle. The tapping of her cane was the only sound in the room. The delegates parted for her, their eyes wide, their hostility replaced by a reverence usually reserved for gods. Ambassador, Valen called out, floating after her. Wait, we can rescind the edict. We can send our fleets with you. The Ethelgard Armada, the Saurian battle groups, we can fight together. Alara paused at the airlock threshold. She did not turn back, but she shook her head. No, Counselor, your ships are designed for precision, for police actions, for fighting each other. They are beautiful glass cannons. The hush would shatter them in seconds. Our ships are bricks. They are ugly, heavy, and built to take a beating. This is a brawl, not a duel. You are the gardeners of this galaxy. We are the wall. You stay here. Grow your gardens. Keep the lights on. She stepped into the airlock. And Counselor, try to be a little quieter. The hush are listening. The airlock cycled shut. The clamped tremors vibrated through the floor once more. On the view screens, the massive human shuttle blasted away, rejoining the formation of the Leviathans. And then the movement began. It was a choreographic masterpiece of logistics. The human armada, a swarm of metal so dense it possessed its own gravity, began to turn. They did not turn toward the Council worlds. They turned outward, away from the warmth of the core, toward the cold, black void of the galactic rim. Valen watched them go. He watched as the subspace drives engaged, tearing holes in the fabric of reality. One by one, the massive ships vanished, leaving behind trails of Cherenkov radiation that glowed like scars in the night. In minutes, they were gone. The stars returned, twinkling coldly, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. The silence in the council chamber was absolute, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of a funeral. They are gone, the technocrat whispered. No, Krex said, standing up. He looked at the data slate Alara had left behind. He picked it up with a reverence that was uncharacteristic of his species. They are not gone, they are on duty. Valen moved back to the central dais. The shame was still there, but it was joined by a new feeling, determination. The humans had shamed them, yes, but they had also given them a gift, a second chance, a future bought with human blood. He activated the main console, his hands moving with a speed and purpose they hadn't possessed in centuries. "Cancel the Edict of Containment," Valen ordered, his voice ringing with authority. "Flag it as an error of judgment and initiate Protocol Awakening." "Protocol Awakening," the AI queried. "That protocol does not exist, Counselor." "It does now," Valen snapped. "Open the archives the humans left us, distribute the data to every university, every shipyard, every foundry in the core, tear down the trade barriers, cancel the debt cycles. We are going to build, we are going to learn." He looked at the delegates, his eyes blazing. "The humans said our ships were glass, then we will make them diamond. They said we were loud, then we will learn to be silent hunters. They have bought us time. If we waste it, we deserve the dark." The chamber erupted into activity. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council was not debating. It was working. 10 years later, the Galactic Rim was a place of nightmares. Here, the laws of physics were merely suggestions, twisted by the encroaching presence of the hush. The stars were dim and red, drained of their vitality. The void was filled with a static that screamed. Admiral Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the UNS Hephaestus, a dreadnought that had once been pristine gray but was now scorched black, its hull pitted and scarred. The ship shuddered violently as a tendril of dark energy lashed against the shielding. "Shields at 40%, called out the tactical officer. "Sector 7 is buckling." "Hold the line," Thorne said, his voice gravel. "Reinforce with auxiliary power. Reroute life support from decks 10 through 20. Evacuate those sections." "Serve fresh contacts, the hush are surging." On the tactical display, the red shadows were swarming. They were endless, a tide of entropy that sought to wash away existence. The human fleet, a battered wall of steel, stood between the tide and the galaxy. Wrecks of human ships floated in the void, silent tombs for thousands of sailors. They had been fighting for a decade without rest, without resupply, without hope of victory. They were only fighting for time. "They are pushing too hard," the comms officer said, panic edging into her voice. "The UNS Ares is gone. The Valkyrie is venting atmosphere. Admiral, we can't hold them. We need to fall back." "There is nowhere to fall back to," Thorne replied calmly. "Behind us is the core. Behind us are the gardeners. We do not take a step back." "Admiral," the sensor officer shouted. "Slipspace rupture detected. Massive scale behind us." Thorne closed his eyes. This was it. The hush had flanked them. Or perhaps the Council had finally decided to come and finish the job of outlawing them. "On screen," he said, preparing to give the order to ram. The main viewer flickered. Space tore open, but it was not the sick red tear of the hush. It was a clean, brilliant blue, and it was not one tear, it was thousands. From the slipspace portals emerged a fleet, but it was not the fleet of 10 years ago. These ships were sleek, yes, but they were armored in crystalline plating that refracted the starlight. They moved with the grace of the Ethelgard, but carried the heavy weapon mounts of the Saurians. They were a fusion, a hybrid of human durability and alien science. "This is High Counselor Valen of the United Galactic Defense Forces," a voice boomed over the comms, clear and strong. "Calling the UNS Hephaestus. Apologies for the delay, Admiral. We had to upgrade the engine designs you left us. We found them a bit sluggish." Thorne stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. The Council fleet was firing. Beams of coherent light, amplified by tech that shouldn't have existed for another millennium, sliced into the hushed shadows. The entropy recoiled, burning under the assault. "Counselor," Thorne managed to say, "I thought you were gardeners." "We were," Valen replied, and Thorne could hear the smile in the alien's voice. "But we found that gardens grow better when you have a fence, and we realized it was rude to let the neighbors do all the work." The Council ships moved into formation, slotting into the gaps in the human line. Saurian battleships placed themselves in front of the damaged human carriers, their shields absorbing the blows. Ethelgard frigates danced through the crossfire, delivering precision strikes. "All ships," Valen's voice rang out across the entire frequency, heard by every human and alien sailor in the sector. "Target the primary mass. Synchronize fire with the Terran fleet. Today the edict is rewritten. Today we do not contain humanity. Today we stand with them. Thorn felt a laugh bubble up in his chest, a sound he hadn't made in years. He gripped the railing of his command deck. "You heard the counselor," he shouted to his crew. "All batteries lock on. Let's show these ghosts what a united galaxy looks like. Fire." The void lit up with the light of a billion suns. The Armadas, old and new, forged in fear and tempered in friendship, unleashed their fury. The hush screamed as they were pushed back, burned away by the combined light of 100 species. In the silence of the aftermath, as the shadows retreated into the deep dark, the two fleets floated side by side. The scarred, ugly bricks of humanity and the shimmering, elegant spears of the Council. They looked different. They thought different. But in the dark of the rim, they cast the same shadow. Valen's hologram appeared on Thorn's bridge. The ancient alien looked tired, but his eyes were bright. "Admiral," Valen said, bowing low, a gesture of supreme respect. "The Council is in session. The first item on the agenda is a motion to rename this sector." Thorn raised an eyebrow. "Oh, to what?" "The Terran Shield," Valen said. "And the second item is to ask if you have any spare coffee. Our engineers have become quite addicted to it during the refit." Thorn smiled, the weight of the universe lifting slightly from his shoulders. "I think we can arrange that, Counselor. Welcome to the line." The galaxy was vast and the dark was deep. But as the fleets began the long work of repairing and fortifying, the fear was gone. They were no longer alone. The children had grown up and the parents had learned to fight, and together they were invincible. The Armadas were not just assembling, they were home.